Welcome everyone and thanks for coming. So today I'd basically be discussing the challenges that I faced in 105 and also some earlier challenges I faced in a similar course at IIT Madras, which is the first year undergraduate chemistry course. Just to give you a picture of the course, typically the numbers have varied anywhere between 200 to 350. And the learners are not that excited about chemistry, maybe a small portion is. So that's sort of the learner set that we are talking about. And this used to be a mandatory course for all first year undergraduate students. And typically these courses are run in parallel. So there are 4 instructors teaching each of these divisions. So it's also important to have sort of the same content when we deliver this to four divisions. So I'd like to acknowledge a few people. I had gone through a faculty development program 1 semester after I joined at IIT Madras as an assistant professor. So I had 1 semester experience of teaching, and this development program was quite useful in terms of familiarizing myself with some of the techniques that people use in the education domain. So I've tried to experiment with some of these. There's a lot more that can be done. So I would like to acknowledge Professor Freud, who was the resource person, and also colleagues at IIT Bombay and IIT Madras, and also students. Having informal discussions with colleagues is very fruitful, and even places like these during tea breaks and even later, you get these connects. Some of my friends from Madras and Bombay are those who were part of this FDP. So we've still been in touch and share our pains and classes and what people do. So that helps quite a bit. So this is sort of what is planned for this session. List challenges that people typically face in large classes. This may vary depending on your domain, and maybe some strategies that you could take away for your class. So a lot of things from my experience I feel is very instructor centric and domain centric in the way of how people interact in the class. There is a component of the faculty personality that does come in. So these are things which worked for me. Some of these might work for you, some might not, but feel free to experiment and tweak as you find it useful. So to begin with, just to get a feel whether the challenges that we are addressing are the same, because it might be that some of the things which I found a challenge might not be a challenge for others. So accordingly, we can emphasize on some of the strategies that I had used in my class. So what we could quickly do is maybe each of you could list out 2 major challenges that you have faced in a class you taught, or you're planning to teach a class and you anticipate these challenges. And then after a minute or so, you can pair with whoever is close to you. So this might involve some reorganization here. And then narrow it down to 1 major challenge, and then we'll go forward from there. So if you're done discussing, you can continue discussing as well. But if you're done, you can go to this www.menti.com and use this code and list out your major challenge. So these are some of my challenges, and I'll just add on to this list based on the list that we just saw there. So broadly, the difference between, I guess, a large classroom and a small one is scalability, because a lot of the issues that we face in smaller classes in terms of motivation, etc., it's just scaled up in a larger class. So a lot of these learner diversity, we do see that in smaller classrooms as well. But smaller classrooms, maybe it's easier to have one-on-one interactions, whereas in a larger classroom, the scale is a lot higher. So I've tried to break it down to 3 things. One is classroom management, because it is a pretty large class. Almost some of these are the size of some small village in India. So you have 300, 350 people. So there is bound to be some sort of chaos there. It is but natural. People who like to use the board, especially if you've taught in LA, the steps are pretty steep in this sort of, what's this called, balcony sort of setup. So the people who sit at the back, they find it very difficult to read what you're writing. So this has been an issue in terms of, whether learners at the back could see what you're writing on the board. The other thing is disruption. So these could be people coming in late, especially when you have an 8:30 class, people do come in late. They do come in late at other classes also, but this is a bigger problem in the 8:30 class, especially once you're done with the first week. The first week, actually, 5 minutes before the class, you see the entire class is empty. But once you go in later in the semester, that starts to drop. Maybe we are to blame for that, I don't know, because the first week students seem to be there 5 minutes earlier. Then there are parallel discussions that go on in class. There was once an issue where the projector would randomly shut down in the first year class. I don't know if anyone else taught that semester. All teachers face this, that there are 3 projectors usually. One would shut down, and then after some time the second one would shut down once the first one is on, and this would go on. And later on during the course, because we were conducting feedbacks periodically in the class, some student wrote that it was students actually shutting it off because their mobile phones, you can download an app which can control the projector. So they were shutting it down. So initially we thought it was some sort of a technical issue, but then it was the students who were actually... oh my God. So sometimes ignorance is bliss, because we thought it was a technical glitch. We would go on with the class and continue, and then after a while, many of the faculty were not reacting to this, so it sort of stopped. It wasn't cool enough or entertaining enough. Time management, a lot of times, because you have a lot of content, these parallel sessions that I spoke about, 4 instructors, so there's a lot of stress about covering the content in time. Students will ask a lot of questions. One good thing about a large classroom is the energy. So again, whenever you have a distribution, statistically the number of people who are interested in the course also goes up. So you'll have a lot of people who will be asking, very excited, asking questions, especially the first year. They are very excited about being an IIT. They want to impress the professor. So they'll be trying to ask very difficult questions. So the number of these also goes up in a large classroom. So that's a positive, because you have a lot of this energy in class, but time management is something you need to think about. And then the other learners shouldn't get left behind because of this discussion. The other major challenge that I faced in large classrooms is doing activities. So I'm guessing Sridhar would have spoken yesterday about how having activities in the class is, there is a lot of research which shows that that enhances learning. So if I'm delivering a lecture in class, I think scalability is pretty good in a small class versus large class, because we have these huge gatherings here where you have one speaker, and we see that during Mood Indigo and all these. You have crowds of 1,000, 2,000. So if you're standing on stage and speaking, I think the crowd size doesn't matter as much. If it's 50, 100, 1,000, 2,000, you can do it in convo. But these activities is where scalability is a challenge, because you'll have more people working together. Crowd control becomes a bit of a challenge there. The other challenge is gauging learning. So are the learners with me? Do I need to repeat a topic? Because as I said, there are these enthusiastic kids who seem to be completely with it, asking all these very complex questions, but there might be others who are totally lost and be like, what are they talking about? So that some sort of mechanism to gauge whether people are with you or not, that is a challenge. And I think the ones missed out from here, which came up in your feedback, was people not feeling connected with the subject. That was one thing. Deriving large equations, I haven't personally worked on that, but that is something you can think about, or we can discuss later. But a lot of it was focused on the motivation of the learner and also working out some of these large problems. So we will address those also in the Q&A. So just like any large event, I think organization is what is n times more in a large classroom. So the preparation that one has to put in is a lot larger than a small size classroom. In terms of logistics, a lot of it is logistics and scalability. So any course you can think of in terms of a cycle. And for me, I like to have some framework to work with, because then it makes it simple for me to check, is this going right? Is this not going right? So typically when we have a student come into the course, we have some expectations from them. So if it's a first year course, you expect them to know something about the subject. That's sort of your starting point. And then we focus a lot about conducting the classes, how we can make it interesting, what are the examples I can show in class, how do I make it very interesting for students so that they feel they're connected. Then the thing that we all do this actually, we think of, did it work, did it not work, and look for some measure as to figure out, are these expectations being met? And then you go through to the point in which you think of what are the changes you'll incorporate in the next class. Because based on the student feedback, you know what works, what doesn't work. So for each of these, there are strategies that can be used to make classes interesting, and I'm sure PPCCLT or ET can do sessions on these, on having more active learning in the classes to make it more interesting for students. Also, there's a lot of research on how you can collect evidence from the learners to figure out whether they're actually meeting whatever expectations that you have. So for me, the framework which I've used quite a bit is the learning outcomes for the course. So typically we have a syllabus which is sort of mandatory for every course at IITB. So we all get handed this course assignment. We have a syllabus which is a list of topics. The learning outcomes is something quite different from the syllabus in the way it outlines what exactly you expect your learner to do with the instruction. So I could be doing this course which is on thermodynamics. So the syllabus would say something like first law of thermodynamics. But the learning outcome would tell the learner at what level they are going to be working with. Are they just going to be defining it? Are they going to solve problems with it? Are they going to apply it to a real life system? So the outcome also gives some idea of the level at which the learner is thinking. So this sort helps you categorize your content in terms of the cognitive work that the student is doing for each of these topics. So you can classify them as something which is recall, involving understanding, involving application. Again, there are tools for this, you can look it up. I have some slides as well if anyone wants it on learning outcomes. But these provide a framework to categorize the content in terms of the cognitive effort the student has to put in. So this also is a useful guideline to prune the content, sort of like the editing that film editors do. So some of the things which are recall based, I needn't waste 15 minutes on it. It could be just a handout that is given to students. So this provides some framework for me to edit my class content and also tells me maybe these are the topics that need more time. I do it at a course level, and I'll just show you one plan from one of my classes where whatever is relevant in that class, I try to break it down as well. So this is handed in to students the very first day of class. So if many of you must be using Moodle, I think Sundar did a session yesterday. So the learning outcomes are posted on Moodle before the class starts so that students also know what is expected. Sure. And I do it at a course level where I have 4, 5, 6 outcomes for a course. But people do it differently. Some people like to break it down to every class. So it's very instructor dependent. And yeah.
In the new curriculum, I think learning objectives are already defined hard and fast, right? Do we need to stick to it, or you make it flexible based on what you gauge must be the retainable topics?
So earlier also, I think ASC and the academic section needed this, but it's still not a mandatory thing in the course approval form that goes to the academic section. So I do think you have yes, but I think in terms of content, what you and your co-instructors decide is a suitable outcome for that course. That ensures that everyone is delivering at the same level. Otherwise, we have always these things, oh, I deliver it at depth and whatever. So this ensures that everyone is at the same level of delivery, if you break it down in terms of the cognitive effort. Also with the outcomes, it's important that when you write it, the students are able to check whether they are meeting the outcomes. So there are some guidelines as well as to what would be a good way to actually frame a learning outcome. So one thing which I have found convenient in a large classroom, as I said, with a lecture mode, it's quite scalable. You can do it at any scale, barring technological glitches, etc. But the activities becomes a challenge. So some sort of a middle ground is what I have found useful. There is a paper on this and you can get other literature on it as well. So break down the lecture into smaller segments. So have some sort of a 5-minute or 2 to 3 minute class opener, and this also ensures that if people are coming in late, it doesn't disrupt it as much, because here you are discussing, there are different strategies you can use for these first 2-3 minutes, but so you're having this discussion in class and it's not disruptive when people come in late. Or initially there was this biometric attendance that people had to do in the first year classes, so everyone would be doing this in the first minute, etc. So all that is taken care of. Then you can do a lecture like 8 to 10 minutes, because that's sort of the maximum threshold I think that students have for listening to a person. And then have some sort of an activity for 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on how you have set up your class. And then again get back to lecture, have an activity, do your lecture. So depending on how you have your lecture hour, 1 hour, 1.5 hours or 50 minutes. This also breaks the monotony of the class, and during this time you can also walk around during the class. So the LA class, it just looks very large, and once you start walking around the class it seems a lot nicer. So you can walk around in the class when these activities are going on, and there are also TAs thankfully for the first year courses, so they can also be walking around the class with you, assisting students during these activities. So this is sort of a lecture plan that I have for, say, part of a lecture or one lecture, where you put down what outcome that you plan to do and a typical activity that you would do for that. One thing which I've noticed is repeating the same activity over and over again also becomes a little boring for students. So you have to play around with what activity you do. The course I teach has a lot of 3D visualization of molecules, part of it. It is stereochemistry. So these are the outcomes for this. I use Mentimeter quite a bit because that's scalable. It has a lot of different formats which you can use. It also has a quiz format which is timed, which is good for large classes. It puts a leaderboard, etc. also for people who give in the answers. And people enjoy it. They play around with names. You have names like Sheldon in the class, or faculty. I've had our chemistry HOD show up there once. So people have that. There are profanity filters as well on Mentimeter, so you can put that. But also in general, you should be prepared to handle if anything comes up there. But so students like that, I keep it anonymous, so that way there isn't as much pressure. So you can use Mentimeter, give them an activity, a problem where they work it out. Sometimes it's a problem which might involve a little bit of, working out to get the final answer. And then you can convert it to an MCQ and get them to use it in Mentimeter, because like Karodpati, the bar graphs show up. And so students can see how they have fared. The other thing is the think, pair, share method. So where working in pairs is okay in a large class. Groups, some of our classrooms are not very amenable for that. We do that in tutorials. In the large class, I haven't been very confident using groups, but pairs quite a bit, because people can just turn to the person next to them. And again, TAs can walk around, help students as they're working out this. And also with chemistry, we use these chemical model sets. So they're expensive and not every student can handle it. So we also have online versions of this where you can look at molecules in 3D online. But I've also used these sort of paper models where people can just take a sheet from their book and try to create some molecule out of it. So each person is doing it. It's a scalable activity where every person has access to the tools and they're doing something, trying to visualize the molecule using these papers. So the activities is something you can take a call, be innovative depending on what your area is, and design what it is. But it's important to set the time for each of these. And the time which is here is different from what I project in class. So if this is 5 minutes here, it's typically 3 minutes that I show on the slide and give some 2 minutes buffer time. And usually the question answer also accompanies that. So these are just representative activities, Tanushri.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask was, out here, any of these activities, how do you ensure that every person is actually doing it and not that they're discussing? I mean, if a think pair share, you want them to first carry it out themselves.
Right.
So one problem I have had is, even if I ask a question, I've seen people just sit and not necessarily engage with the question at all.
There would be a portion who would do that, but walking around the class, asking them, do you need me to repeat the question? And TA is also doing that, because we have 10 TAs per class. So the TAs are also walking around asking students, do you need any help? And sometimes, I mean, I once had a student who was making some sort of a devil picture or something while I was walking around, and then you can, I mean, sort of joke around about it, but usually there would be a small portion who might not be engaged, but when you walk around, at least they feel obliged to get the notebooks out from the bag and start scribbling something at least. And I have some numbers in terms of people who are actually participating. I mean, I don't know if they were just doing guesswork on Mentimeter, but I use that as some sort of a framework to gauge whether people are following.
The small percentage, if you can see about 70-75% engaged, that's actually good. You won't get 100%. Don't even aim for it. But somewhere from 70 to 80 is good. And I think walking around will get that. If it's much less than that, then you'll have to try some of the tricks.
In small classes, we have class participation and marks for it. Does that work for large classes, or is it a good idea not to have class participation marks for such large classes?
We have so far not done it, just because this brand change business is a very touchy sort of subject, and so whatever we do, it has to be fair and uniform, and we need to have some metric. Unless we have some rubric or something where we clearly define, oh, these are the metrics that we'll use for class participation, otherwise there might be variation in terms of perception. I have not tried it.
The class participation is, we hand out a sheet. There is a question which they have to solve. We take it, and sometimes whoever has attempted gets marks. Depending on the question, because sometimes it is just to make them think, in which case everybody gets 5,
right?
But that is sort of attendance mark. Sometimes only if they solve they get, which means
that's a good idea.
But in large classes, I don't know how to scale this, because now I'll have, let us say, 250 sheets. Every class is not...
So one thing which I know, not our class, but our physical chemistry 107 people had did, is they had asked students to hand in something, and the TAs had actually gone through the material. So we have total 40 TAs for the course. So we could break it down and students could read it, where students were asked to summarize what they had learned in class. There was actually a student who wrote a rap music thing about quantum chemistry, which was very good actually. It covered the content extremely well. I have it saved in case anybody wants. But TAs are quite, I mean, they are like co-instructors for many of these large classes. So this is actually a very good idea, where you can have problems which are for grade, and then TAs can check it.
So students evaluate themselves, and whatever marks they decide to give, you give.
Some of the things I've tried for activities at the end. This initially, when I started out, I wasn't using Moodle as much. So this was when I was in Madras, where I would take these one-sided papers that I had in my office, cut it down to 8 pieces and hand it out in class. And at the end of the class, you ask students to write what was most useful, what was most confusing. And then you would have these bunch of sheets at the end of the class. So I would go through them, categorize them in terms of the topic they were having trouble with. And at the next class, I would start with, so I would use a tally mark to actually see how many had a problem with the topic. And then I would project that in class. These are the responses I got. This had the highest tally mark, so I'm going to address this. Probably I didn't do a good job of explaining it, so I'll repeat it again. So that also gives you something to open with in your class. But again, students get bored if you do the same thing. So initially I had done the same thing every class, and then the numbers dropped quite a bit. So the other things which work really well is this Moodle hot question. So Moodle has this activity which is called a hot question, where students can post queries and other classmates can see the questions they post, so they can upvote it, so they can like it. And depending on the number of likes, the question automatically comes on the top. So in class, you can just project the Moodle page for the course, and for the last year class that I did, I had a policy: if a question has more than 20 votes, I would definitely take it up in class, and later on, depending on the number of votes, I would decide whether to take it up. And those which were also not addressed in class, the answer was posted on Moodle, so, or some resource. So this way, at least the questions get addressed. One thing I've noticed is students, if they see some value in doing this, that it is addressed at some point, they would engage in some of these things. Other variations are, you can ask them to write a summary, post it somewhere, like my physical chemistry instructors had done. So they had posted a summary on Moodle, and other variations, whatever you want. The other thing which I've tried is give some sort of a complex problem of the day. I either put it on in the class, and these need to be something where the solution cannot be obtained with Google. I have not yet tried ChatGPT on this, but it would be interesting to have some sort of difficult problems out there and then take it up in the Moodle discussion forum. Originally, I used to use Google Classroom. Nowadays, I use the Moodle discussion forum. There are other, I think, online platforms also. Piazza, etc. I have not used it as much, but people have used it and said it's quite nice. You can have interaction online. So a lot of things which might not be possible in class, you can do a lot of these offline using some of these online resources.
What percent of your class actually participate in it? So out of 350, I mean, not just what...
I would tell you it will be only 15%.
Okay.
Max. That's the max I've got in a Google form.
But it's still worth it.
I still think it's because there are these people who still see it and be like, okay. A lot of activity happens on WhatsApp in these classes. People seem to be very comfortable using Telegram, WhatsApp, etc. WhatsApp has a limit of 250. So for 1,400 or 350 or whatever, people use Telegram. I have not had like a big WhatsApp group for my class. I didn't want to really share my phone number, but I have co-instructors who have done that, and the WhatsApp groups are very, very vibrant and active. People keep posting because it's easy. You can just post, repost the same thing sometimes.
I find that all students only look at WhatsApp. They barely read instructions on Moodle for NSEMs or assignments. So anything that you post on Moodle, you have to anyway tell them on WhatsApp, which is why I was wondering if people are doing this discussion forum and all. So
the percentage is lesser than WhatsApp. And one thing which I have tried is the TAs have tutorial sections that they run. So each TA has around 35-40 students, and they have their own WhatsApp groups, which I am not on. So they take ownership of that group as well. I have a WhatsApp group with the TAs. So if there are queries that they are not able to address, I tell them, please post it on this group. Either me or one of the other TAs will address it. So those groups are very active. Also, people who face language issues, etc., the TAs do additional help sessions. So we've had TAs who have done help sessions for students beyond the tutorial hours, where they have requests from students to take help sessions. We once had a UG TA who did a help session on dealing with stress in the first year course. We did not participate, or it wasn't our idea at all. It was just something that the student did and took this initiative. And they also have then different ways of engaging with students, which is different from what I do in the class. So students also get a variety because the TA is now engaged. Yeah.
How does this Moodle hot question work? Is it like on everyday basis, or do all the questions pile up just before the quiz or the exam, one day before the exam?
No, it depends on how you set it up. So you can set up the activity. It's like any other activity where you add the activity, you add the hot question. What I did is I did it for every class. So after the questions are addressed, I would just delete it from that, the hot question page. So that new questions come.
One thing which I noticed was when we had this WhatsApp group for the first years, many of the questions came only one day before the exam,
Yes.
and that too in the night.
Yes.
So I couldn't address them. So the whole purpose was not met.
The TAs are actually awake very late the day before the exam. So I've had some instructors of mine go to the hostel mess and address questions. So if you're interested in doing that, you can do that as well. So people just go to the hostel mess and address these questions. But we have these subgroups with TAs, which I found works quite well because the number also is smaller, because each TA is dealing with 40 students. So that seems like a more doable number than 1,400 or whatever. So for the opening part, usually it's the recap of the previous lecture. The Moodle hot question, I project that page and then go based on the questions. And problem of the day, sometimes students don't have any solution. So you can nudge them, give them some hint about that. If the solution is already posted, you can just tell them that it's posted on the discussion forum, so please refer to that. So these are some major challenges. One is getting back to lecture mode after activity, because the class actually is quite noisy. You have people talking to each other, etc. So as I said, defining the time at the beginning is quite helpful, and also defining the time which is -2 minutes or something of what you had internally planned is useful, because you don't stress over it as much because you know you have this buffer. And a lot of times during the discussion, more complex topics evolve depending on what problem you have given them or what activity they're doing. And quizzes on Mentimeter, as I said, are auto-timed, so that's not an issue. This I have already covered. The learning outcomes actually help filter the content, and my lecture content usually is just the bare minimum that they need to know to address some of these problems, and then more discussions evolve after the problem is done. So already there is a primer. People are primed to think about the topic you are going to discuss, and they have some confusion already. So when you talk about it, they feel, oh, this is why I was facing this issue. So the problems that you choose are also quite important in terms of addressing with the follow-up lecture. And this I am actually liking it quite a bit. When I started, I had these policies put in place. You know, you cannot use phone, you cannot do this, do that. I have sort of left a lot of that. I don't have that anymore in my class. The only thing I tell them is, please don't be disruptive during the class, be considerate to your fellow students. And I'm usually okay if people are sleeping in the class. I don't have a big issue with that because they're not disruptive. And I joke about it also. There is a chemist who dreamt up the structure of a molecule in his dreams. So I said, maybe something is percolating through. So with that belief, I say I'm okay with you dozing off in class. And I've also had an example, which is an eye-opener. I was doing some problem. This guy at the very end, sleeping, actually walked to the board and solved it. Then I said, oh, that means there's some problem with my lecture. Or maybe the person just doesn't need to, you know, spend time over it. So I've let that slide. Challenges for students. Students are not comfortable doing this. The feedback that I used to get is that we don't want to do stuff. We just want to listen to you. It's very uncomfortable. Some of them get very perturbed. You know, I'm not able to solve this. There are just a few people who seem to be getting this very quickly. I'm not getting it. So that is a challenge. So first class, usually I describe to them why I'm doing this. It's not to torture them, because research shows it actually helps their learning. So it's mainly, all of this is for them. That eases their stress a little bit. The other thing which I joke about, this is something which a student told me actually. During the Mentimeter projection, I realized, oh, there are others who have also gotten it wrong. Because sometimes when you're working on your own, you feel you're the only one who's not gotten some concept correct. So with Mentimeter, you see a distribution. There are a section of the class who has not gotten it correct. So usually I try to repeat that part again in the class, saying that maybe there is a different way in which the same concept can be explained. Calling out students, this is again in the chits which I used to hand out earlier. A student had written that, please don't call me out during class. It's nice you're trying all this. But most of the time I'm very scared during the class that I'd be picked on. So please don't do this. So ever since that, I've stopped asking for volunteers or anything. Or even if they're working in a group, it's the answer of the group, answer of the neighbor, or something like that, where it's not focused that much on a individual. And all these activities are anonymous. So that way, the stress is a little less. So I actually show them this. This is what I'll be doing, why I'm doing this. I also show them this paper which shows, so shown in red is, did you show something similar to this already? So shown in red is on the x-axis is the learning gain. So learning gain is determined not in an exam immediately after the course, but after a while, just to see if the students retain what they have been taught, the concepts. So being on the right is a good thing in terms of gain, and these are the fraction of courses on the y-axis. So red is lecture mode and green is activity-based mode. So I always say that, you know, I might be a person giving horrible lectures, but doing these activities, I can still reach somewhere where the best lecture-based people are. So that way it tells them that A, their learning gain improves, and doing this, I mean, it's not as teacher-centric. So for me also, it eases off the pressure. I don't have to, you know, give this great, my delivery of content is not as much of the focus as how the activities are designed and what they're doing in class. And I tell them it's okay to get it wrong, it's fine. I joke about this as well. If you get it wrong here, you have the whole class helping you out. It's better than one day before the exam where you realize you're not getting the answer. And for me, this is also an indicator as to how the content has been grasped. If a lot of people are getting a problem wrong on Mentimeter, I know that it needs to be addressed before I move on. This is sort of the average student feedback over the years. They like having outcomes because they can self-evaluate. They do think in-class activities improve their understanding. I've never had a disagree or whatever over the years. After I've shown why I'm doing it, before people were a little negative about it. They did not like doing stuff in class. This is last year, the Mentimeter as a gauge for engagement. But again, there might be a percentage of people who are just, you know, just putting some answer for the sake of it. But there is a dip. I won't say that it's completely sustained or whatever. There is a dip. The dip is similar in medium-sized classrooms, smaller classrooms, but still by the end of the 4th week, there are 200 students who are still participating and trying to do this. So in general, they seem to be more engaged in the class. So that, at least I find it quite gratifying. I need to do a bit more work to figure out whether they're actually engaged or just manually participating.